My name is John Parenteau, and I work for Blackmagic Design, but I'm also a cinematographer. I've been a cinematographer since I graduated from, actually even before I graduated from film school at USC in 1987, so now you can kind of do the math and figure out how old I am. But I've been shooting everything from, in the beginning it was film and Betacam video, and now transitioned into digital world. So today we want to talk a little bit about Blackmagic cameras, about how to work with them. I know there was recently a film challenge and there's a lot of questions about certain settings and things like that. To be honest, a lot of the work you do with these cameras is going to apply to almost any camera. The menu systems will look different, the choices will be different, but in terms of what you can select, but it's really the same concept. Ultimately, you have to make a few decisions early on in your cinematography. One is, are you trying to shoot with a cinema camera, or are you just going to try to shoot? So as a storyteller, ultimately the goal is to tell the story with the camera. You don't need a fancy cinema camera to do that. As a matter of fact, it's probably better to learn how to do that with just something simple. Because this framing and how to set up coverage and how to actually direct actors and things like that has nothing to do with how fancy your camera is. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And if you have a regular camera, just a camera like a DSLR, or you want to use your cell phone, that's perfectly fine. There are certain tools in those worlds where they'll make it a little bit more flexible. There'll be more options to use. For example, if you're using an iPhone or an Android phone, you can download for free the Blackmagic camera app, which basically gives you the menu system roughly of one of these cameras, but on your iPhone. So you can adjust the iris, you can adjust focus, things like that. So it kind of gives you a little bit more of a pro feel, but with a phone. And that works both for Android and iPhone, and it's free. So if you want to kind of up the ante a little bit, but not get into one of these, that's great. But if you're ready for the cinema world, there's a few things you should be aware of. Number one, you have to understand the concept of log versus linear, okay? Does anybody understand that? Okay, got a little bit there. So log is basically the sensor records in a very wide image range. If you imagine, I'm going to use a metaphor of light coming from the sun or from anything. There is a visible realm of that light. Beyond the visible realm, there's ultraviolet, which is way high and in wavelength, and infrared, which is way low. But our eyes basically are able to see the space in between, not the ultraviolet, not the infrared. So if you think about that, that's kind of how you describe a LUT, a lookup table. When you hear the word LUT, somebody says, I want to apply a LUT to this. That's what a LUT is doing, is it's defining a visible realm that kind of makes everything look normal. At least somewhat normal. And you can range, that LUT can be very different. It can be super high contrasty, super colorful, or it could be very muted. All those kind of Sicario movies and those movies that you see that are really sepia tone and stuff like that, that's kind of like applying a LUT with that look on it. So the camera itself, though, these cinema cameras shoot a much wider range of color and exposure. And the problem is that when you look at that, it looks really washed out and muddy. It doesn't look good. But that's just because it's trying to show you way too much information that you're able to, or the monitor itself can display. So what you need to do is be aware that you're going to have to do something to that in post-production to make that look normal if you're going to shoot that way. Now, in a Blackmagic camera, logarithmic is what log stands for. They call it film mode. So if I were to turn this camera on here, and okay, ooh, don't get excited. Okay, so if you see under, I'm going to just make sure I'm on the right page here. So you'll have to come look later, but I'll show it to this camera too. There's 3 settings in here under the record panel. There's video, extended video, and film. Film is what we call film, it's log. Okay, so that's going to get your wide range of image that you can do a lot with in post-production to make it look cool, but you're going to have to do something to it. If you want to not worry about that and just shoot something that's going to look good, neutral good, not super fancy, but you're not going to do stuff in post to it, you can choose extended video or video, and that's going to sort of apply that LUT we talked about to the file, so to the image. So you're sort of committing yourself to a look, but it's going to be kind of a neutral look. So I saw a film in the last film challenge here that somebody shot, they shot log, they shot film mode, but they only applied color correction to a couple shots. I think they probably just ran out of time. But it's very obvious. One, a lot of the shots look very washed out and not a lot of color. And then a few of the shots were like, "Whoa, that's brilliant." Somebody really went in and dialed up, the contrast and put in, chroma and saturation and things. And that's kind of what you want to be able to do. So you have to be ready if you're going to shoot in log or film mode to commit to that in post-production. You have to have time to do that. And if you attend our Resolve class, which we're going to do virtually in January, I'm going to do that too. So I'm going to go through some very basic ways to color correct in Resolve. It's very simple. It's very daunting, obviously. You look at the panels and you're like, oh my God, I don't even know what to do there. It's too much stuff to do. But really, there's a very simple approach to that to make it look good. And you can just bang, 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 and it'd be done. So it's not as daunting as you might think. So anyway, that's number one to think about when you're shooting with cinema cameras, is the fact that you need to shoot in some color format that is going to be usable to you in post. So either log, doing a color correction, or an extended video or video which kind of commits you to a LUT look. So that's one thing. I just want to get through that because that's kind of really where the cinema camera differentiates between that and shooting an iPhone or some simpler camera that doesn't shoot in log or film mode necessarily. So to take a step back now, there are a few considerations you have to take into account when you shoot stuff. And when we do the film challenge, I loan cameras of almost all of these cameras that you could use on your film. And they all are similar, but they're also a little bit different. And some of them may be way more than you need. So we have here first, I'll go backwards. This is the Ursa Cine 12K. And so this is the new flagship camera for Blackmagic Design. It's, I won't go into the specs because I'll have to explain them later, but it's basically a full-on like Alexa style cinema camera, very high end. And it might be way more than you need to worry about. But it would make your film look really cool if you knew how to shoot it correctly. This is the Pixis. So this is 6K. Again, a lot of camera, but is great. It's just a different form factor. It makes it riggable. You can see there's a cage on this one, so there's things you can mount to it if you want to do other monitors or mount it onto a dolly or something like that. It's simpler and designed for that. And then this is the Cinema Camera 6K. So this camera and that camera are identical. The only difference is the body shape. So this is we call a box camera, and this is just called I don't know, we call it a DSLR, or we call them the pocket format, but it's not very pocket. Can't fit it in your pocket unless you have very large pockets. But ultimately, they all shoot in log or extended video or video. They all have a high dynamic range, which means that they have great width of exposure. So bright to dark, there's a lot of range there, which is a good thing. And they just require different accessories. The higher end you go, the more stuff you need around it to make it work, particularly like heavier tripods, and there's a viewfinder there and things like that, which many modern filmmakers may not be accustomed to. This one also, same thing, viewfinder. They take different batteries. This camera uses these little, probably more familiar batteries that you might see around, whereas this one has these big bricks, and this one has a 24-volt battery, which is actually, they're hard to find even in town to rent. So it's a B-mount, 24-volt B-mount. So when you choose the camera, you just got to remember that they all have their own complexities. But also remember, I'm going to always go back to this, it's not about the gear. If you're going to shoot with a certain kind of gear, you need to understand it. But remember, you're telling a story, and that's number one. That's paramount. So framing, camera movement, if you're going to do it, and the performance in front of the camera are far more important than shooting any of this stuff. So that example I said of the film that didn't have all the color correction, they did a great job of getting performances out of people and getting coverage and things like that. The one thing they just didn't do is color correct the whole thing. But the story was still there, and they did a fine job. So that's the only problem is not color correcting it. It detracts from the overall picture. So you want to try to make sure you're cohesive in all the process. So in shooting with a Blackmagic camera, it applies to almost any camera. There are certain requirements you have to consider. Okay, number one, lens. Okay, we don't make lenses, so you have to get a lens from somewhere. And they all have different lens mounts. So let me ask a question real quick. How many of you have ever shot with a Blackmagic camera? Okay. How many of you have ever shot with like an Alexa or a Red or, okay, yeah. So you guys are somewhat familiar with that kind of stuff. And what about you two? Have you shot with, what's the cameras you guys have shot with?
For video?
Yeah, sure.
I shoot aerials with, I'm a drone pilot.
Oh, drone pilot, okay, great.
And then for my movie, I actually shot it all with my drone for the Easter Seals Disability Challenge, except for one where I needed a shot with a looked like a nanny cam, and I used my cell phone and turned it black and white.
Perfect, okay, good, yeah.
But yeah, but I'm a professional still photographer, right. So, but I'm going to be doing Sony. So I'm going to get a Sony FX3.
Okay.
I believe.
So the thing to consider for all of those cameras, except for the cell phones, are the lens. You need a lens, and obviously there are a wide range of lenses. For example, this is a Sigma lens. These are both Sigma, but this is called a cinema lens. This is just I think it's more of a photo kind of lens, and then this is called an art lens, so it's even smaller and more simple. But if you get into the nitty gritty of it, lenses are important, but again, it comes down to, if you're at the level where you're worried about what kind of slight color addition a lens gives to an image, then you shouldn't probably be doing a film challenge. You should be doing something else, because it's like the super detail of filmmaking that is not always necessary to worry about. We can get into that level of cinematography later at some point, but holding for a plane, for a helicopter. But with all of these cameras, these higher end cinema cameras, the Reds and the Alexas as well, you're going to have to sort out a lens. And then you're going to have to sort out a couple other things. One is batteries, as we talked about. So you're going to have a lot of batteries. I usually carry, for when I shoot with this, I carry like 15 of these. Now, I don't use 15 of them. I probably use 3 in a day. People say, oh, this burns through a lot of batteries, but if you shut it off between takes when you're doing setups and don't just leave everything on, it's not a big problem. So, but you do need to make sure you have enough batteries. Yes?
What distinguishes a lens to make it, what makes it a cine lens? What makes it a cine lens instead of a, what?
It's just it's the quality of the build, the quality of the glass that they use. Okay. They really make sure that the glass is color neutral usually, and how it reacts. And it's also the size of the elements of the glass. So it allows more light in, and it's a cleaner, it has less what they call breathing. For example, if you rack focus foreground to background, the image doesn't move. And the more cinema you get, the higher quality it is. But unless you're doing a lot of that stuff, it doesn't matter,
Spherical lens versus cine lens versus...
Well, these are all spherical. So let me address that. So these are all spherical lenses. The counter to spherical is anamorphic, or that is one of the versions of what it is. So anamorphic, all it is instead of a round piece of glass, it's a squished piece of glass. Actually, it's this way. Okay, so what it's doing is it's capturing that image but squishing it into this square of the sensor, and then when you project it again or display it again, you have to stretch that image back out again. And that's what you get, the super wide image, like the Panavision kind of super wide angle. So that's just a different kind of lens. And all the cameras, or most cameras, have a settings that you can adjust on your monitor, so you can, they call de-squeeze. So you can at least look at it normal and not everybody all squished together. So when you operate, you can see, but then the file itself on the camera is squeezed, and you have to unsqueeze it in post-production or in display. So those are just a lens situation, and that's a style choice, the anamorphic versus the spherical. Anamorphic is super cool, and that gets into an artistic question of what you're trying to display. If you're trying to do, for example, a film where the character is supposed to feel really alone and like isolated, then an anamorphic kind of feel is great, because you can stick them on one side of the frame and there's a lot of empty space, and so that emotionally provides you with something. You have a question? Okay, hold on. So it provides you with a different emotional tool of framing. So whereas spherical is going to be more of the size. We have a question from the crowd.
Yeah, so a live stream question from Carlos. He is wondering, so the Blackmagic 6K full frame has an L mount, and he's looking to get a PL mount adapter, and there's so many options. So he's wondering, is there one that Blackmagic prefers?
No, there is no. We don't recommend any of them. I mean, a wide variety of them work fine with the camera. Just be aware of this with the adapters. Well, first of all, I'll address the L mount issue. Both of these cameras are L mount. This one is PL. So the difference between the mounts, just to backtrack on that, is that the L mount is more of a photo mount. It was a Leica camera company kind of started it, and then there's the L mount, I think it's the association or whatever it's called, that other lens manufacturers and camera companies have joined to support the L mount. The thing I think that we like about it, I won't speak for the company, but I know myself and a few of the other people in the company, the L mount is very adaptable. So if you have a PL mount and then you have EF lenses, another mount, it's a lot harder to go that way, whereas an L mount is so flat and it's to the camera that it's very easy to adapt that to other things. So if you have several different kinds of lenses, you can buy inexpensive adapters that'll take the L mount to whatever it needs to be. So that's the benefit of an L mount, at least with regards to our cameras. The other thing with the adapters is that a lot of these lenses are what we would call either smart lenses or automatic. They're essentially powered lenses. So if I were to, this is an L mount lens, and if I have it on the focus on autofocus, I can touch the back of my screen, and it'll focus onto that. It'll automatically adjust the lens for focus. If you use a passive adapter, so an adapter that has no electronics in it, it won't communicate between the camera. So if you're using cine lenses, that's fine, because cine lenses are all manual. So you're going to do everything manually anyway. You don't use any autofocus tools. But if you expect to use that kind of thing, then you're going to have to make sure that the mounts and adapters that you get are essentially smart adapters or powered adapters that have the ability to communicate between the lens and the camera. So just be aware of that. So for example, if this was an EF lens and I put a passive adapter on here, none of that autofocus stuff would work. So that's one thing. Some of the lenses only have auto iris, so the amount of light you put in, and then if you do that with a passive or a non-active adapter, you can't even adjust the iris of the lens. So, but you just have to be aware of that when you get the lenses. All these lenses are more pro lenses, so you can see, here on the lens right here, there's actually f-stops. There's a dial to adjust the iris on the lens. So that makes it so that I can use, if I needed to use a passive adapter, I could. No recommendation, just be aware of that, the passive versus the active adapters. Okay, so lenses, very important to consider. Batteries, very important to consider. Storage, very important to consider. So this camera uses these media modules in it. So it's we talked about this being like a whole nother game, So that it takes a media module, which is 8 terabytes. It kind of goes in like a big thing, and then to offload it, the most convenient way, I guess we'll say, that's not true, but one of the ways to do it is using a media dock, which we provide, which you plug it in and then it offloads to your computer. So there's infrastructure there. There are other ways to do that, but that's the basic way to store on that. This camera, you can do 2 ways. So for example, this is an SSD drive that I just have connected with USB-C to there. So I can record straight to SSD. Or if I go in here, you can see in here, there's a CF Express card too. So I can go either way. I just put one in here so you guys can see that slips right in there. So that's something you have to be aware of. And then you have to just remember that it takes a lot of storage space. I'm trying to carefully navigate all this so I don't jump around too much. Storage is really important to consider, and also the resolution at which you shoot. So now granted, you're going to probably finish your film in HD or maybe 4K, UHD, Ultra HD, for example, for online use, let's say, for example. The cameras are all capable of shooting far above that resolution. And whether you shoot in that resolution or not, number one, you have to consider storage and transfer. You have to transfer that data off of these cards or drives into your computer. That means your computer needs to have the space, or you have to have like a little server or an external drive that's big enough to put all your footage on. And then your computer has to be fast enough to be able to kind of access that footage. Now, if you shoot Blackmagic RAW, which these cameras do, of course, Blackmagic Raw is a very efficient codec. So it does two things. The cameras do two things with regards to the codec, which is the file format of Blackmagic Raw. Number one, you could shoot 12K on that one or 6K on these, and most modern computers, Mac or Windows, will play that footage back fairly real time because it's a very not compressed, but it's a very efficient codec. Number two, the cameras actually create proxies on the fly. So if you are in Resolve, for example, DaVinci Resolve, and you're on the timeline, you can actually tell it to prefer proxies. And so now that's just HD, and every computer will play that fine. And so then you don't have to worry about, dealing with the camera original files that are slowing down your computer. Use the proxies, but when you export your project, the final project, it will know to go back to the camera originals and use that as the source. So you don't have to worry about switching that back. So that's kind of cool. So, but you have to be aware that you have to kind of deal with that kind of a large amount of data that is going to come your way. So I shot for Tuesday and Wednesday, the behind the scenes of a Kia commercial. And I shot with this camera and another one on a gimbal. And I didn't really ever fill these cards. This is like terabyte of data. So I think I probably shot for, I don't know, a total of 30 minutes maybe or something like that, maybe even less. It took like an hour and a half to offload each of the cards, or 2 hours to offload each one of these to my computer. So it takes time, and you're gonna have to be aware that that's an issue when you're dealing with it. It's the data management part of filmmaking. So just be aware of that too. When you shoot with these cameras, this camera is a little bit of a different animal, and I can explain that briefly, I think, in a second. But more importantly, shooting with one of these cameras, you have options when you record. So if you see here on the Blackmagic cameras, you have there's only one codec on the Blackmagic cameras we offer these days, Blackmagic Raw, because it's really more efficient. And also recording, for example, on 12K, they can't save ProRes fast enough. And it's ProRes, the codec, that makes that difficult. Whereas that's what Blackmagic Raw was designed for, is being able to record up to 12K at a high frame rate even, but still have a high quality file. So that's why everything is sort of Blackmagic Raw these days. But yeah, Blackmagic Raw, and then you have different qualities here. So I'm reading upside down. Constant bit rate and constant quality. So constant bit rate means that it will make each file size, each frame basically of each file, the same amount of data. What makes the difference in the data is that, for example, if you're doing an action film, so it's a lot of moving around, a lot of motion blur, a lot of craziness, every frame is a different amount of data that the codec has to record. So it's always adjusting. Whereas if I'm shooting an interview, the computer, or the camera, but it's sort of a computer, knows that when you're talking, you're changing, so it has to adjust each time, but all the background and everything is staying the same. So it's not really actually trying to figure out how to record a lot of data except for the person talking. So constant bit rate will create kind of a continuous style. The nice thing about that is at the bottom, when you say, so if you can't even see that. At the bottom, it shows how much time I have to record on this particular piece here. So this one says 9 hours. So I can record 9 hours on this right now, and that's at constant bit rate and 8:1, which is a level of compression. So if I go to constant quality, what that's going to do is basically always keep the quality up. And so again, our example of lots of action versus somebody just being interviewed, the codec is going to say, oh, well, we're just interviewing you, so it's a low data rate. The data rate that it's trying to record is very low, so it doesn't need to have a big file size. So the best way to explain that is that I put it on constant quality, and Q0 is like basically no compression at all. So that's the highest resolution. And I've just about, let's say I was going to shoot an interview, actually, was the first thing I did. And it said 2 hours of recording time. It's like, great, okay, 2 hours of recording time. I recorded, did an interview of 20 minutes, stopped the camera, and it said 2 hours of recording time, because it was estimating 2 hours, but then it realized, oh, well, I'm barely using data, so actually you haven't really used much of the drive at all yet. So it's going to constantly adjust, and some people hate that because they want to know how much storage they have left. They want to know what's left on the camera so they can get ready to switch a card or whatever. Other people are like, well, I just want the best quality I can, and that's what the constant quality is versus constant bit rate. Now, constant bit rate, as I briefly mentioned, there are different compression levels: 3:1, 5:1, 8:1, and 12:1. It's very minor, so if you really are not like in a pixel peep, as we call it, and really look for every bit of grain, or you're not really shooting on a really low light setup or something like that, you can use 12:1 and you'll have tons of space. So if I, for example, went to 12:1 here on the constant bit rate, it says I have 13 hours of storage. Whereas I went to 3:1, which is less compression, it says I have 3 hours of storage. So I gained 10 hours by going to 12:1 compression. The less compression is better, but if you're not really worried too much about, like I said, pixel peeping, then higher compression is okay. I often shoot 8:1. You can't even tell. You can't tell. So it's not too big of a deal. So we had a question.
Yeah. We have a question from Carlos again.
Carlos is at
storage.
Why isn't Carlos here?
Carlos is wondering. He says, he says sorry. I'm in between getting another CFast Express card or SSD. Is there any limitation of going SSD? Can I go open gate with the highest resolution settings with SSD on the Blackmagic 6K full frame? I was thinking about getting the Samsung T9 4TB, but I wasn't sure if CFast Express was the only way to get the best quality out of the camera.
No, it's not. You do it with an SSD. What you need to do is go to the Blackmagic design website, go under support, and click the camera tab. And in the middle column, there'll be, you may have to scroll down a bit, but there'll be a document that says these are the supported drives and cards for that camera. So it'll say specifically the Cinema Camera 6K, here are the supported SSDs and CF Express cards. Make sure you're using those cards, and then you're going to be okay either way. I shoot with the SSD and I've never had an issue. This is one of the approved SSDs, so that's the consideration. Just make sure you're using an approved card and you should be fine either way, or card or SSD. Yes?
So I was following, when I was thinking about log, I think of log versus video. In the still cameras, I think RAW versus JPEG.
Right.
And I was following you perfect until you said now you're going to shoot in RAW. How does that relate to going to log? Is RAW a different thing than log?
Yeah, kind of. They're similar, but log is the spatial image that is being captured by the full image that's being captured by the sensor. RAW is the format that it saves. So if you shoot in RAW, which is like Blackmagic RAW, if you shoot RAW and log, you're getting the highest quality you can get.
So
Yeah. So if you shoot in, not that we can do it in this cameras, but if you shoot in log, like the film mode on here, but save it in JPEG, you're going to get a wide gamut image, but JPEG is a very compressed format. Yeah, so you're going to lose a lot of data in just the file format. Yeah, so they're kind of hand in hand, but they can work independently. But yeah, so you want preferably film mode and Blackmagic RAW, because then you're getting the fullest gamut, and that's what the sensor is all adjusted to as well. So. Tell Carlos you can ask as many questions you want. I've just given you a hard time. So the storage is the other consideration we talked about. So when you're shooting with the Blackmagic cameras particularly, let me just run through my little setup. So I shoot a lot of BTS, behind the scenes, of other projects. And I usually run with 2 cameras. So one camera is this one. So it's using a Tilta cage. I'm gonna mention sponsors, Indy and Haley. Tilta cage here, a Hollyland wireless lav, and I think that's all. And then Samsung is not really a sponsor, but a wooden camera, follow focus. So basically, I'm using this little kit because it's really functional for me. I can have a wireless lav. It's just like this one. I go stick it on the director, and he forgets or she forgets about it, and I can chase around and get them. I just have to remind them that I record everything if I'm recording. So it's a really handy thing to have. You know, it's connected right here. The SSD is here, so I don't have to worry about switching cards during the day. So that's really handy. Now, in a cinema format, you have more time. You're sitting down, you're doing stuff, so you may not need this. Obviously, you might have a sound person who's feeding sound to you, not using a lav, but that's, you know, that's how you want to do it. So I basically am running around like this. This is how I hold it. So I'm running around and see my hand is resting there, because then I literally can follow focus people just by using this, and it's really kind of cool. So I do rack focus and stuff all on my own. But that's what that setup is about. And you can put a matte box on front as well. The other camera setup I have is on a RS2, a Ronin RS2, which is a gimbal. And it's the same camera without the cage, and usually a small lens like that, so it's lightweight. And then I use that for doing like the cool moves, like dolly moves, or doing, you know, pull-outs. It just looks really cool motion-wise. So that's kind of my setup right now. But the important thing I point this out for is that in addition to storage and how you set the camera, you need to always remember audio. I'm a cinematographer, and I hate audio because I'm a cinematographer. But you realize you have to pay attention to audio because it's an important part of filmmaking. So I've kind of had to self-teach myself a little bit of these things. So, but always make sure to take that into account when you're prepping your film, that you have to have good audio. It's just as important as good picture. So beyond those things, with the Blackmagic camera, the other thing that I do with a setup on the Blackmagic camera is that at the top of the camera, and all of them have this in different places, but you see these 3 buttons. See those, like 1, 2, and 3 dots. There's like these 3 little buttons you can look at later. They're function buttons. And so in the menu, if I go to Setup and kind of just scroll over to there, so you can see F1, F2, F3. I can set each one of those function buttons to do something, like activate something specific. So I usually do these 3 things. Function 1 is set up with Focus Assist. So what Focus Assist is, at least in terms of Blackmagic, is it creates like a red line around anything that's in focus. I think I can show you. So yeah. So can you see this on the camera there? Let me just show them first. So if you look, see this, see the red lines right in here? So if you can see, it's kind of hard to show. I'm also working upside down. See, watch this little basket right there. If I go in and out of focus, can you guys see that at all? See those red lines?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Shut up, Siri.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm very rude to Siri, but she just takes it. So, Focus Assist allows you to grab that focus quickly. So that's a really cool thing to have. And so I usually have that set up on function 1, and then it literally will even show up when you do playback. And then it's annoying because you're watching playback, you can't adjust it, but you can just click the button and shut it off for playback and then turn it back on when you want to. The second thing I do, and remember we talked about the log, shooting log, or film mode as they call it in here. You can put a LUT on your image that is non-destructive. So basically, if you shoot in the video mode or extended video, you're sort of forcing a LUT onto the image that you're recording, which if you don't usually want to do if you're going to do a little color correction or want to be able to manipulate the best image later. But when you're shooting, it's really handy to have a LUT. Let me actually shut this iris down. So if you look here at my function 2, see I kind of got washed out? I'm going to shut off the Focus Assist. So there's that, and then there's that. So basically, I'm putting a LUT just on the image. Here, I'll show you here. So there's log, and there's a LUT. Can you see that? Okay. Okay, so basically, it allows you to kind of see a rough example of what a properly color-corrected image is going to look. And if we go back to that whole conversation we talked about in terms of log and putting LUTs on, you can kind of see how it looks washed out because it's just showing a wide dynamic range of an image, and so it's trying too hard to show too much on a monitor that's not capable. But you put the LUT on, and it's basically saying, oh, okay, now I know where your black level should be, I know where your highlights are, et cetera, and that's what it's estimating. Now the LUTs, there's a LUT in the camera, a couple of them, that are sort of just like a basic LUT. You could, if you wanted to be super fancy, create a LUT in DaVinci Resolve, like a look, like see you want a really noir style, or you want something super high contrast and very like sepia tone. And you want to kind of be able to look at that on set and say, is this working on set without recording that way? You can create a LUT in Resolve and then load it into the camera. All you do is put it onto like this SSD, and the camera will read it, and you can just load it in. And so now you can flip on and on your LUT with that crazy look you're trying to achieve and say, okay, yeah, that's working or that's not working. Now just be aware that doesn't always work, because if you're creating, you have to start some way with creating a LUT. So you're going to go outside in your parking lot or whatever and shoot an image in the day. And you create a LUT and you go, wow, that looks great. Okay, then you go on set and you're actually shooting inside a dark bar that, it looks like night. And you turn that LUT on and you go, why is everything so dark? It's because you created a LUT for the daylight outside in your parking lot, and it's not the same. So you have to create multiple LUTs, or just be aware that it's not going to be a common look. But at least it kind of gives you something you can look at if you want to get an idea of what your style is going to be. But that's also in the menu system. If you go into, it's actually a LUT button right there. See, you just go to LUT right there. And so some of the preloaded LUTs are already in there, and you just click them and hit the check mark, and that gives you your new LUT. So I don't know what these LUTs are, so that one's darker, but anyway. So that's something to be aware of in terms of that LUT. Then the third button, I often have, and I think that only has 2 buttons, but the third button, I have what's called false color. Okay, so now that brings us into the concept of exposure. In the old days, meaning when I started shooting, I carried around a light meter. And so a light meter is like a little globe, and you hold it up to somebody's face, and it kind of mimics their shape of their face and how much light is falling, and it says, oh, you set it to whatever film at the time sensitivity you had, and you say, okay, that's an f4, let's say. So then you dial your camera into an f4 on the iris right there, and you're exposed. So I still own a light meter, but I don't think I've had it out in a long time. There are other tools to help you make sure your exposure is at least in a realm. Now remember, in the day of film, you were really limited in terms of what your color correction can be and the range. Film has a lot of dynamic range, but with the chemical process of film, it's very difficult to access all that information. Now with digital world, if you shoot film, you scan it in digital and you can do a lot of things. Or if you shoot digital, you can do a lot of things as well. But the thing to know with film, overexposure, because remember you're shooting negative. So if you shoot the sun on a negative, that appears black. And whereas if you shoot the sun on digital, it's basically a positive. It's white, it's going to be white. It's going to be no data, it's just going to be gone. And the beauty of film was that because bright things were dark, you had a lot of gray in there that sometimes you couldn't even see if you just held it up, but you had the ability to draw detail out of the highlights that you don't with this. So you have to make sure when you shoot digital that you protect for the highlights. Now cameras, cinema cameras, this is another benefit of a cinema camera. I mentioned it earlier and now I can talk about it more. You have high dynamic range. And what that means is that the cameras can properly capture detail. There's a light meter right there. You can properly capture detail over a wide level of stop. So for example, this camera is a 15 stop dynamic range. So it's 15 stops of light. So these are stops in here if you're using a manual lens. It can expose a wide range of color, brightness with that camera. This, I believe these are 13 stops, so they're not bad, they're pretty good. I think a red is like 15 or 14 or something like that, and Alexa is similar to this one. So they're all, the higher cameras are all in that kind of 13 to 15 plus realm. So that's great, you have a high dynamic range, but you still can't overexpose the digital, because once you overexpose it, the data's gone. There's no detail, there's no information, and usually it's called clipping. Okay, so you're clipping the image. So there are different tools that you can use to make sure that your image isn't clipping. Now, obviously, you can use a light meter, but you can also use internal tools. So I was talking about false color. If you see I click that button right there, you see that? See how it's kind of, there's areas that are red and stuff? Okay, if you look on the left side, there's a little scale that kind of explains that for you. So red, what do they call it? Yeah, well, it's a little code, but red is basically way overexposed. Okay, so anything that's red, you've lost all information. Now, if I shut that off, you can see those areas that are red are kind of white and blown out. So the false color allows you to, and green is sort of where you want to be. Green, the lighter gray and into pink are kind of where you want to be. So if I now were to adjust the iris, see, I'm closing. If I go wide open, there's the red. So I don't want to have any red, so I'm going to close down so I don't have any red. So now that's more, at least we're not peaking on any of that image. But the problem is that the dark areas are going to look really dark. So let me shut off the false color. So underneath the table there and things is kind of getting dark. It's not horrible, but you can't, it's not just a blanket thing. This is sort of just a tool to help you understand, oh, geez, I'm really blowing that out. I need to work on it. And that's where lighting comes in. Difference between documentary shooting and narrative shooting is hopefully you have more control. So you can go in with a flag or whatever and take out this highlight. Instead of darkening everything else down, you take out the highlight a little bit, dumb it down a little bit so that it doesn't blow your sensor out. So that, oh, a flag is just a piece of cloth in a square frame that you can stick on a stand, and it would just literally block wherever that light is. It just block light out. There's a flag. You can have the same thing. There's different sizes, but let's say a normal size. You can have a silk, so it's like shooting through a shower curtain. So instead of getting rid of the highlight, you can kind of mute it down, but you still get the light coming through, things like that. If you look at these windows, they're kind of a little bit of a silk kind of thing. So I'm gonna turn. So if I go in here, I'm gonna open up a little bit and zoom in a little bit. So somewhere in there, the light on you right now is a really beautiful soft light because the sunlight's going through sort of a silk, and that's the beauty of a silk kind of thing. It's a softer light than the harsh light of the sun. That we can get into a whole long conversation of what lighting is too, but I don't think we have the time for that. Andy? Yeah, she'd be better. Well, I don't want to get too deep into that yet. So, so false color will help you actually make sure you're kind of in a realm. It takes a little bit of understanding. You can see the scale. Look it up online. Some false colors are slightly different ranges in terms of what colors means what, but that's one way to do it. The other tool that I use, and this is going to be even harder to show, I can show it to this, if down on the bottom left corner, and again, when we're done here, you guys can step up and actually we'll turn all these cameras on and you can kind of look at these things. But there's a thing at the bottom here that's called the histogram. Okay, and what it is it's kind of a scale from the left to the right, left being dark and right being overexposed. And if I don't know if you can see it, but it's like a graph. Okay, there's a graph of data. So the more brighter, if I shoot out the window, it's going to blow away. The scale goes to the right, and if I go into a darker section, the scale goes to the left. So I'll have to show you when you can get a little closer. It's a little hard to see. I can show it to the streaming audience, but if you see that there, and then even if I just close down the lens, see how that histogram scale is going left and right. So the nice thing about that is that if you kind of set it so that you got peaks in the middle and slightly to the left, then you're good. If your peaks are all to the right, you're overexposing stuff. So that's kind of a quick way to kind of light meter it. And the neat thing about the histogram thing is if you're pointing at somebody's face and there's dark around, it's going to show you the peaks on that highlight area. So it's almost like a light meter kind of thing. But again, I think those are all like rough tools that are wonderful, but they're not really understanding what the light is doing in a scene. So it's really important that you try to dig in a little bit more and understand how to manipulate light and how to make things look, pleasing rather than just exposed. But sometimes when you get to the level again, we'll go back to it again, which I promised I would. It's about the story. So it's about the actors in front of the story. It's about how you frame the camera that tells the story. It's not necessarily about exposure. Again, like cinema cameras and fancy lenses and anamorphic, yes, when you want to get into that, they will all enhance the story as well. But if you're really just trying to tell a story and learn the brass tacks of filmmaking, those are things you shouldn't worry about right now. You should worry about that framing, the actors, camera movement, and a little bit of lighting to make sure the lighting is also telling the story. I go by a cardinal rule whenever I teach film. Anything in front of the camera that's on camera tells the story, whether you like it or not. So I've had filmmakers in film classes, they go out and make a film every week, and they come back and show it to the audience, or the class. And one young lady made a film of two people sitting on a couch talking. The camera was kind of shooting over the coffee table to the people. So watched the film. At the end, I said to the class, so what does everybody think? Almost everybody said, what was the meaning of the book on the coffee table? It was like Sense and Sensibility. Was that saying that the character was X, whatever? They had all these thoughts about the props on the table. And when the filmmaker could speak, the filmmaker says, no, I just wanted to put something on the table. But they didn't realize how much that affected. If they didn't want somebody to talk about those elements, you've got to be aware you're telling that story with those things. So, and that goes for anything. How you light a scene tells the story. How you don't light a scene, how you move the camera, how you frame the camera. Indy and I taught a class at Cornell earlier this year. When was that? I don't know. Yeah. That we were talking, it was like a very heavy scene about two young people. One of them had tried to commit suicide and hadn't told her best friend, and was trying to figure out how to do it. So there was a moment of isolation, even though it was sitting side by side. And so we had a moment where we were doing the single on the young person who had tried to commit suicide, and the camera operator, they were learning how to operate, had framed that person. They were all facing, so from your perspective, I'm the person, okay, and the other person's sitting here. They framed him because they turned back to their friend now and then. They framed him so the room was on this side. They allowed room for that person to look over. And I just said, how about just frame it this way, okay? So basically, you have all this empty space over here. And when they just turn every once in a while, but they're looking out, they're alone in this space. And it really tells a different story than it does if you just frame it neutrally or traditionally. So these are things you have to be aware of when you're making a film, and it has very little to do with what camera you shoot with. But of course, being with Blackmagic, I will say, try to shoot with our cameras because they're awesome. So just to revisit this, light meter, you can see the dome. There's a little dome there, and the idea is you can just hold it in front of somebody's face, and if I hold it here, you see how it's lit on one side and not on the other, much like a face would be, and that's going to tell me if I want to neutrally expose that face. So half taken into account for the highlights and the shadows, then whatever it says on the meter, I can set the camera to. Now, obviously, if I want that dark shadow side to go darker, I just turn the meter to the light. So now I'm exposing for the light, and the shadow side will go dark, or you can go the other way. So that's kind of the help of that. The problem with a meter only is that you have to also be aware of the background and everything. You might have to go meter that, or have what we call a spot meter, which is something that you can shoot from a fixed position and get a meter reading. But they measure light in a different way, so you have to be aware of that. But anyway, I think I'm done. Yeah, please, let's have questions. Anything? Nothing?
Can you talk about the Pixis and why the Pixis came out? Why it was created?
Oh, yeah.
It's the newest thing.
Yeah, these two are both the newest cameras. Pixis, people just wanted a box camera. And the reason it's called a box camera is because you can rig it to anything. So this camera format obviously is a lot harder to rig to a crane or to a drone or things like that, because it's sort of DSLR kind of style. Whereas this one actually, the Pixis is inside, and this is a cage around it. But you can see all these aren't just decorative holes, these are actually all mounting points. So you can mount 1,000 things. This thing, you can mount it in any way you want to, upside down, sideways. And that's the beauty of the Pixis. It's designed to be mountable. People will complain because the monitor doesn't flip out, but that's not the kind of camera it is. That's more of like an assistant camera person's monitor, not for watching. You usually have a viewfinder or a separate little monitor here if you're actually operating the camera here. So this is designed much more for like rigging. You can still shoot anything with it. We shot it these last 2 days on the Kia commercial like just a traditional camera. It was just lighter. So if we were in the forest and so we had to march off into the forest, a lot easier to just rig this up into a handheld than it would be that. So so that's why they had this there. And I've had other filmmakers put this on a drone, because a drone can lift, a heavy lift drone, but still a drone can lift this. And we've had this on a drone too, but it obviously takes an even bigger drone to do that. So it's just having functionality and different uses for that. A lot of the higher end cinematographers that use our cameras, they use them because they're so small, but they give a high resolution and high quality, so they can tuck them in the corner. I had a friend of mine who shot a film in a plane, like a Cessna plane, small plane, and he's shooting. I think originally was going to shoot with I don't know, Cine Alta or something like that, just a full-size cinema camera, and he couldn't get it in half places. So he got a bunch of these and was able to just have massive coverage because these would fit in a corner or fit in spaces that the bigger cameras couldn't. So that's the other benefit of that, is that in such a small form factor, you get something that is the equivalent image quality to an Alexa or whatever the other cameras, but you can do more with it. So that's the idea. So that Pixis is that, and then we kind of had been toying with higher end cinema cameras for years, with the Ursa 12Ks and the Ursa Mini Pro 4.6Ks. This was kind of like the culmination of all of that, just building a real massive, real cinema camera that has a lot of the functionality that the assistant camera people and DITs and stuff had asked for. So just to give you a quick rundown, in addition to, the monitors that flip around, this side has another, this is an AC monitor. If you have a smart lens on it, I don't know if this is a smart lens, you can actually pull focus. It'll give you digital readouts on this side, so you actually pull focus from the monitor, so that they don't have to have a separate monitor to do that. It has wireless capability, so as you're shooting, it will, if you set it up, it'll upload proxy, do camera originals, but you have to have a really big connection. But the best thing to do is have it upload proxies directly to DaVinci Resolve. I was shooting a project in August with this, and we were in Glendale, and Australia was watching the shoot. So we were uploading proxies real time, and they were watching what was coming out of the camera in Australia at the same time. So that all works with DaVinci Resolve. It also has Ethernet, one of these little ports here. So you can, a 10 gig Ethernet. So if you want to maybe we talked about the media dock as a way to get footage out of that, but you also can connect a 10 gig Ethernet and just pull it off. That's the other thing we did, is we watched proxies real time, but we had a, whenever we did a reset of a scene or something, so everything was gonna be done, we just connected the Ethernet cable and it downloaded the camera originals right to the DIT, pretty quickly. So they were always getting new data, and it's still saving onto the media dock, so you have that backup as well, or the media module. So there's a lot of functionality like that this camera has that the other cameras, we're sort of growing into a full-on cinema camera concept. Has LEMO connections, which are kind of professional power connectors and things like that. So that's what this whole thing is. But ultimately, they're the same thing. They're just, it's another camera, it just has more features. But yeah, I haven't shot with it yet. I'm excited. This is my first demo of that unit, and I've been loaning it out. I don't get to use it very much.
Can I ask you questions?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, Andy.
The two things.
Yep.
You talked a little bit about compression, obviously lensing, things like that. Can you talk about censored windows, what that means?
Yeah, I was getting to that, and I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't.
And then I'll ask my second one.
Okay, so what she's talking about is that all cameras have sort of a native resolution, that they have a resolution in which they use all of the sensor. So in this case, like in these cameras are called open gate. So basically at 6K, it shoots all of the sensor, okay? Now, if you want to actually shoot in another resolution, like let's say, I don't need 6K, I'm just shoot 4K, it does a thing called windowing. Let me go back here. So, I don't know. So you can see here right now, it says 6K open gate, okay? But it has a lot of other options. So you can shoot in 6.5 anamorphic, 6K DCI, Super 35, 4K DCI. So that all's all well and good, but let's say you're like, I just need 4K, so I'm just gonna shoot 4K. So you click 4K. You'll notice right there, show you in that camera, and then here, it says resolution sensor windowed. Okay, so what that means is that it is now no longer using the whole sensor. So it's actually windowing down and using a smaller part of the sensor to get the lower resolution. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking for, you want, like the full capability of the sensor, you want to shoot in the native resolution. That goes for any camera. All cameras have this same situation, not just ours. So you just have to be aware of that. What that's also going to do, which is kind of the more critical thing, is that a 50 millimeter lens at open gate is going to, say, look like this, okay? And a windowed sensor, that 50 millimeter lens is going to be here. So it's going to actually zoom in your lens. So a 50 lens is going to be a longer lens, like more of a zoom lens, than a 50 on an open gate setting. So that's the thing you have to be aware of. So you're like, oh, I want to do a lot of wide angle shots, and you're setting it to, you look at it on the open gate 6K, and you're like, oh, that 18 millimeter looks great. I wanted to use that style. But then you decide in the end to go to a windowed thing. That 18 millimeter is going to look like maybe a 28 or a 30 or something like that, depending on what resolution you go to. It's going to actually zoom in on that lens, so it's not going to achieve what you're expecting. So you just have to be aware of that. It's not a bad thing. If you don't want to run a ton of data, you want to be more lean on your data, doing a windowed version down, it's fine. But the lens is probably the biggest thing to be aware of. It doesn't affect the log quality or film quality of the image. It doesn't affect the Blackmagic raw file or the compression. It just affects your basically field of view of that lens.
Is that for every camera?
Yes.
Is that like similar to when they say like crop sensor, like crop?
Yes.
So 50 is 50 on a 6K in this camera, or no? Is it still cropped?
Well, that's if it's hard to, because a 50 is a 50 based on your perception of what a 50 is and what you're using it on. A 50 millimeter lens on an open gate will look wider than a 50 millimeter on a, let's say, the setting at 4K. That's all. So if you're used to, using, like, let's say you shoot with a Leica camera or something that's a full frame sensor, like a still camera, and you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to use that on this lens, but you don't use open gate, it's not going to look the same. One of the things, Mark Mann, there's a still photographer named Mark Mann, does a lot of celebrity stuff. He started shooting, he's mostly a still guy, amazing work. But he started shooting with this camera because people want him to do more video, but he can put his Leica lenses that he uses for still, and this guy does like presidents and famous celebrities, he's crazy. So he wants it to look exactly like his still camera. And because this is a full frame sensor and an L mount, he can put the same lenses on and get exactly the same image, whether it's still or video. So that's the kind of thing when you're really sensitive to that, what the lens is supposed to look like or what you want to look like. And the biggest concern from your end is that if you're trying to achieve a wider angle look, and you have a certain lens that you think is going to give you wide, the more you window that sensor, the more it's going to zoom that in. So you're not going to get the wide angle that you wanted. Yeah.
I had a question, but India and you, I didn't want to interrupt you. No. So thank you. This is really great. I'm loving this.
Yeah.
I'm shooting a feature. We're shooting location. We're shooting at night. We have to move fast. We have to be efficient. Mm-hmm. I think you've already kind of answered this, but I'm really interested in other reasons why I'm reaching for this instead of a competitor. I love the form factor and the versatility of it. I like hearing about some of the features of the camera that others don't have.
Yeah.
And if there's anything else that you wanted to add, I wanted to give you an opportunity.
I mean, you know, I think the idea with this camera particularly, and cameras in general, is just, if you like the functionality, the form factor of it, the menu systems, things like that that's definitely a plus of the Blackmagic. The menus are super easy to understand and very, you know, intuitive. The system is, you know, straightforward. It's not overly complex. You don't really need a ton of stuff to go shoot your camera. Some cameras you have to rig them out. You have to do some stuff to it. Whereas, you know, some of the cameras, you can kind of just, you have a lens and a battery and a card and you can go. You know, so it just depends on your taste. You know, I can't really say any other camera's bad. It just has different attributes to it. You know, if you get into the image quality part of it, you know, people, and I've never shot with a red, but people say reds are pretty sharp. You know, they say that our cameras look color science wise just like the Alexa. They have the same kind of little bit of a creamy skin tone kind of look, but you're really getting really into the specifics of it. If you're really, your DP or if you're the DP, cares about those things and knows about those things, then yeah, that's worth analyzing and figure out what works. But ultimately it comes down to, they're all just tools and you just need to use it for what you're using. And they'll all do the same thing. I mean, people will say, and this goes for every camera manufacturer, including us, that camera shoots horribly in low light. And I said, what do you mean by low light? They said, well, we went outside and shot with no lights. I'm like, well, you think any camera is going to shoot well with no light? I mean, yeah, you can crank up the ISO on cameras and it's going to be noisy. It's just, you know, the thing I've learned about particularly these cameras, and I think most cameras, is that you got to give the sensor something to expose. So it could be a spot on the wall in the background that actually it can, like, oh, that's got a reasonable amount of light. The sensor is going to react to that and say, okay, now I understand how to drop those blacks off. But if you give it no light, and this is any sensor, it's going to try to reach into that darks, and that's when your noise is coming out. I call it grain, but so you have to be aware of that. There is no ideal camera for a no light shoot, but you're hopefully doing more cinema kind of stuff, so you're taking that into account and just being aware of, you know, how you're going to bring in some light, some sort of key light into that scene. But I think it's definitely a question of form factor. Like if you're trying to move, a lot of people who are like, they want to shoot either places that it's hard to get permits, or they really need to be discreet in some way or another, whether legally or otherwise. These kind of cameras are nice because they look like, especially without the rig, they just look like a still camera. So you can go and shoot a big thing, yet you're getting 6K, you're getting raw format, you're getting the color science, as opposed to a larger camera that is hard to, and everybody's gonna be like, that's a camera. So that's I would say it's gonna be flavor, taste, and availability. You know, a lot of people at our level too want to buy a camera because they want to use it a lot and not have to rent. So our price point is a lot more accessible than others. So yeah, that's really similar.
And then one thing to add to, I'm coming over because you have a mic on, so just for recording.
Speaking to the mic.
So one thing to add also to the discussion around like censored and cropped windows is it's a really good example of collaborating with all of your departments, because like you could ask yourself, like, why wouldn't I just shoot on 6K then? Not only are you having to think about the size of the media that you have, but also what your workflow in post is looking like. And so that's why you're involving your editor in the decisions around, do I need to shoot a certain resolution, right? And if I don't, then let's pick something that makes the most sense so that it's fast for us to edit, or if we do have the ability to do proxies, then that's great. But I think that opens up the questions around asking your different heads of department, if you're the director, or if you're the DP, asking through that workflow and preparing a pipeline so that you can accept media like that. Because if you don't need it, then you know it's taking up a pretty extreme amount of space compared to what you could be shooting. And so it's just a good question to ask.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yep.
My question also is,
you have another one.
and I do. I got this one, which I think is a different version than what you have there. Maybe it's the same.
That is, no, that's the one. Yeah.
Same. So this obviously is like straight out of the box.
Yep.
With a
minus a lens.
Yeah, with a Canon kit lens and adapter on it.
Yep.
Can you talk about from a consumer, because this is like maybe prosumer, like entry level Blackmagic camera, I would say. Can you talk about the different functionality and limitations of the cables and things that you have to be considerate of? Because obviously, like a lot of people are used to SDIs if they're in like cinema camera world or BNC, but from this perspective, a lot of them have HDMI instead.
Yes.
And so they have to be prepared for like monitors and adapters and things like that.
Right.
So would you talk about kind of, if this is straight out of the camera, what are some things to consider for the inputs that you have?
Right. So if you look at this versus that, these are the same cameras right
Yeah.
here. This is just like she said, out of the box. One thing I will touch on also, which we didn't really address in terms of lenses and such, these cameras are full frame cameras. So that's basically full frame is defined as essentially like a piece of 35 millimeter film, the full frame of a 35 millimeter film. So it's a fairly large. I had to go back in the day in film when they were shooting film, the camera ran film through the camera at a certain speed, right? So it basically, they have these pulls down film, freezes it, exposes that frame, and then pulls down the next thing. Okay, so was full frame film. And then at some point, studio said, but we're only cropping in and doing like this kind of widescreen, 1:8:5 aspect ratio kind of thing. Let's modify the cameras so they don't pull down as much film, and we'll save a bunch of money, which they did. So that's where Super 35 came out, because they weren't really projecting in like that big 4:3 format. They were projecting in 1:8:5, so they were really just taking out the middle of anyway. So they basically started pulling down less film, and it saved them much money. Super 35 became a very common format. It also fits well with 16:9 and HD. So a lot of cameras have Super 35 millimeter sensors. So that means that it's a smaller sensor. It's not as tall. Whereas the new cameras, like this one, and all of these, are full frame. So they're going back to the old world of the full frame thing. But the thing you have to be aware of is that not all lenses will cover a full frame sensor. So what you start getting is this little vignetting on the edges. So if you don't have a full frame, you have to always ask, is this a full frame lens if you're going to use a full frame camera? Otherwise you will get that vignetting. Even though the mount will work, if you have an L mount, but it's a Super 35 lens, meaning it'll cover a Super 35 sensor, it will fit on the camera, but you'll start getting that vignetting unless you start cropping in and using that Windows sensor and cropping in tighter. Then it pushes past that. So be aware of that. But on to Indy's question or thing. So these cameras, like this camera and this camera, are more of the pro level of camera. So they have connections that are more professional. So like the LEMO power connections. I'll just say these words. Later on somebody says, oh, LEMO, and you're like, I know what that is. They have SDI, so connectors as opposed to HDMI. So they're just a little more professional level, more robust, and designed for a professional world. It doesn't make HDMI any different. These cameras, use this one, this camera has a full-size HDMI port there. So if you want to have a monitor out, you can use HDMI. The nice thing about this camera, as opposed to some other cameras, is that that's actually a full-size HDMI. So it's like a regular plug into your TVs. You don't have to get an adapter or get a micro HDMI or whatever the heck the other versions are. It also has XLR. So on these cameras, I don't even know on that camera. That's how much I know about this camera. Anyway, I'll go to this camera. So in this camera, on the top of it here, you can look at it later, are actually two full-size XLR audio connectors, so left and right. So you can connect, a boom mic to it and things like that. This one, they have XLR connectors, but they're kind of micro ones. So you have to get an adapter because they couldn't fit the big ones on there. So that's that there. This has a USB-C connector as well, and this is how I have that connected to it, just straight to USB-C. So that's good. And then it has up here a mic in, so if you don't want to use XLR, like this lav mic comes out, that's a receiver, and it plugs right into my mic in, and then you just have to set the settings in the menu so it knows it's coming from a mic versus a line, things like that. So I can't tell you, remember, I'm not an audio person, I think I made a point of that. So I always, every time I connect a mic, I'm like, that doesn't work. How about this setting? How about this? Okay, there, that worked. That's good. And then every time, it's always, I never seem to get it right. So anyway, if you're going to rig this out, you have those connections, HDMI. The HDMI is not great if you're running long distances. So if you actually see here, we're running HDMI out of here to the switcher, but we're using this adapter which converts the HDMI to SDI. And not to get into a broadcast world a little bit, but the SDI format is definitely can go long runs. You can go hundreds of feet with SDI without losing signal, whereas HDMI, not so much. It's a little more sketchy, and also the long cables are very expensive, and then they go bad a lot. So if you're ever trying to run like they're doing here, they're converting their HDMI outs on these cameras into SDI so that they don't have to worry about signal loss. But if you're going to get into the world of rigging it more, like you want to put a monitor on here, things like that, you're going to have to be aware that's your output. You have the HDMI, and then you're going to have to mount things onto here. That's why we have a cage on this one, so you can mount things to it. And you're going to have to worry about power. So you're not going to be able to feed power out. On this camera, there's connections on the top here. There's a LEMO connector, and there's these are called D-tap on the top here if you open them up. They are different kind of connectors that you can plug other things into, like monitors and such, whereas these cameras don't have that. So they're much more of a, you're not going to rig them out. You know, this is probably a pretty robust rig for a pocket camera. Maybe you can put a monitor on it. I have a monitor right here. Why would I want another monitor? So, but yeah, these are not really designed for, particularly for super rigging. People have taken these and made them full cinevised, so they put rods on them like this. The rods will come out the back. They'll use a big battery like this on a mount behind it and connect it in and power the camera all day long forever. So there's things you can do, but it just depends on how serious you want to get or how serious your DP wants to get. A lot of DPs are nerds like me, so you buy a lot of stuff. I constantly buy stuff that I don't really need, but they're cool. So, or you can just go and shoot a film with this right here, and it makes no difference at all. So, Andy? Huh?
Yeah, we have a question from Carlos.
Really? Carlos?
Carlos is wondering if you can touch on the Blackmagic 17K camera. And he said, I don't exactly have a specific question about it, but I find it interesting since they seem to be the first to go that high in resolution.
Yeah, it's, you know, in a sense it's not, so we're putting out a camera that should be coming out, I don't know, sometime next year. That's a 65 millimeter camera. It's an IMAX camera. So it's basically this format, but with a 65 millimeter sensor, so massive resolution. And this one shoots 12K, that one will shoot 17K. So I don't know what to say about it other than the fact that I don't know why it was 17K. I'm not sure exactly what that's about. We're also putting out an immersive camera with Apple, which is it's like this same form factor with dual lenses on the front of it that will shoot for the Apple Vision Pro and for the Meta Quest. That's all big hot thing now is shooting immersive stuff, or at least it's coming up. So I think maybe with the 17K it helped with the immersive side. I don't know specifically, but I don't know what to say about the 65. It's awesome. I can't wait to shoot with it because it's going to be really neat. But yes, sir.
Can you feed timecode into this?
I believe you can jam sync timecode, yes, in through the XLRs.
And that would mean that you can't record on board. Oh, you can still record on board as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just basically a timecode sync function. Yeah. So I was asking that to a friend of mine because he uses these little devices, and he said you can just connect them. But he was talking about the Ursa Mini Pro. But this does offer, if you go to the top there, so it's got timecode. There's running timecode, and there's just record timecode. But you have the ability to do timecode and to, I believe, gen lock them together. So, but I've not done it, so I think it's through the XLR connectors. But I have to look that up. Yes.
Can you explain what immersive film is?
Immersive?
Like? Yeah. Is
So,
it, like, are you actually filming from all sides?
Yeah, it's basically like 180 degree. It's two eyes, so it's stereo. And Apple Vision Pro is the headset that they have, and I believe it's, I want to say 120 frames per second. So it's super fast refresh rate in stereo and covers most of your peripheral vision. So basically the idea is to put you into the world. So it's a whole thing, because when we started talking about it at Blackmagic, my boss said, oh, well, it should be really cool. Can we just go shoot immersive? I said, there are like 500 things that you have to take into account that are different from regular filmmaking. Then, for example, where do you hide your lights? You know, how do you have a confidence monitor on set? Everybody has to have the Apple Vision Pro. How do you feed the footage to the Apple Vision Pro in real time enough that you can monitor it and see what you're getting as a director or whatever? You know, there's like a million questions about that. So they're all trying to sort that out, and there's a big process. If you want to plan to go to NAB, which is the National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Las Vegas in April,
We'll be there.
there's going to be a lot of stuff about that. And there's also going to be hopefully a really cool party.
Yeah, that we're throwing.
You can do, you
That
can,
you all have tickets for.
Or-
And these three will also be there.
okay, cool.
Pete, Lawrence, and
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of the new storytelling tool that is coming out, but it's kind of cool, but it's going to be interesting because Meta put out a film, I forget who made it, but it's kind of a horror film, and this is like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and for their Quest, and here's a real simple issue, okay? So you're looking, and so I'm looking at you, but I can look over here, I can look over here, or I can look at you. Now, the actress was actually doing something, you know, going up to a mirror, and what's supposed to happen is that she looks away and then looks back, and there's a face in the mirror, and it's a jump scare, right? The problem is that you're there, and then she looks to the right, because obviously she needs to look away, and so do you. And then she looks back, and you don't realize she's looked back, and you miss the jump scare because you didn't know. That's the problem, is that people don't. You could be the star, and I could be spending the entire film watching the bookcase over there. You know, how do you guide people's eyes? You have to be able to control that, and these are things that people are trying to figure out. So, anyway, yes, sir.
So you touched on the proxies being able to be
The what?
uploaded. The proxies.
Yes.
In real time. However, is there other efficiencies that you've integrated between DaVinci and the new camera in order to save time?
I don't know that they're necessarily between the camera and DaVinci, but the whole cloud solutions plays a big part in that. DaVinci Resolve, you can have, and I do all my projects this way now. You can have them in the cloud, in the Blackmagic cloud, and it's like $5 a month or something like that to have that, and you can have a bunch of projects in there. And so your Resolve project can be in the cloud. So that means that anybody around the world, if you just give them access, they can get into your edit, they can do whatever. So you can have a colorist in one part of the country working on it while the editor's working on it, things like that. So it's kind of cool, and it's really handy. Then there's the cloud, Blackmagic storage, cloud storage as well. So the first way, before we had storage, if I wanted a colorist and an editor work on it, I would just burn a drive and send them, or we'd sync through Dropbox or something like that. Now you can actually just go through Blackmagic Cloud storage. Again, there's a fee for terabytes of storage. It's not horrible, but that way I start a project, I load in my footage, I start editing, and I've already given access to other people, and they just immediately start getting the same footage. So if they select to just download proxies, it's almost instantaneous, and they can start working on the project wherever they are in the world at the same time. So it's kind of that cool, that's what we did with this, is we uploaded proxies to the DIT, but he had the project, and that was going to Australia as well, so everybody's sharing the same data at the same time. So it's kind of cool. And also there's the ability for the client to look at the footage at the same time too, straight out of the camera. There is a way, I've heard, to live stream, to have it like a video assist, but I think it requires another piece. I'm not sure about that, but at least you can get files that's file-based right away, so you can see, the client can see files right away as well and review them. So that whole kind of infrastructure is part of the Blackmagic ecosystem that's been really cool developing. So,
and the proxies are pulling up the metadata as well, so that when you get to post, when you have the actual raw files, it's already synced.
Yep. Yeah, it's literally a button choosing between the two. So it's pretty neat. Yes.
So with the cloud, they still would need all your storage, your files. It's just the timeline on the cloud?
There's kind of two components to it. Well, three, I guess. There's DaVinci Resolve, but it comes with the ability to be connected to the cloud. You have to sign up for that account. So the person who originates the project has to have the the Blackmagic Cloud account. It has to pay for it. So it's like I said, it's like $5 a month or something like that. But for unlimited, almost, I wouldn't say unlimited, but for way more projects than you probably need to have, you know. But everybody else who connects to it, they don't pay anything. Okay. So it's just that person who originates the project pays the $5. And then for the footage, if you have the Blackmagic Cloud storage as well, then when you put it into your system on your computer, it'll automatically load to the cloud, and anybody else who loads the project that you've given access to will get either proxies and camera originals. They can set that. They can choose. So like a colorist might want to get, oh, well, I want camera originals, but the editor's like, I don't care, I just want proxies. But as long as you have the storage component, when you load footage into Resolve, it'll just automatically upload. There's a little thing on the corner that shows it uploading. So it's kind of cool. And almost, well, I don't know. I know the Blackmagic camera app I talked about for the iPhone. We have that. It's free. That is free. But you can set that to actually upload to Resolve as well. So you could be, you know, shooting out in the field, and as long as you have cellular connection, it'll upload your footage to the cloud as well, and a Resolve person can see it immediately. So that's kind of cool too. Anything else?
Should we do a kind of like people can try stuff out?
Absolutely. Yeah.
For people who like haven't, I mean, I feel like everyone here has probably tried out cameras before, but if you're new to trying out a camera, what are some stuff to look at when comparing both of them or the three of them?
I think largely the ergonomic component, which one feels like something you want to manage. If you're planning to do a project where you have a crew and you have dollies and you want to do cool crane shots and stuff like that, this is a lot easier to manage in that environment because it's has a lot of stuff to it. If you're trying to run and gun like we talked about and go out in New York and shoot some cool thing but don't want to get permits on every street that you shoot on, this might be more applicable. So it just depends on what you're looking to do. Also, if you notice, like this comes with a monitor already built in. This has a viewfinder and these side monitors. This has a side monitor. I have a viewfinder attached to it, but you might want a second monitor on that. So they kind of can be configured in different ways. But again, out of the box, all of them, as long as you have a lens, storage, and a battery, you can just start shooting. You don't need anything special.
Now, if they have the IP, do they have the mesh capabilities as well?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's a good question. I'll have to find that out for you.
Amazing. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Yay.
Come on up. Take a look.